In his novel, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, Gabriel Garcia Marquez criticizes the tendency of Colombian society's strict rules to result in thoughtless and mechanical behaviors among the people. It's weird. Marquez conveys this criticism through his characterization of Pablo and Pedro. The Vicario brothers, only described in general terms, are mostly as one character. The combination of their generic physical traits and mechanical behavior contributes to their characterization as an everyman figure for their society. As a display of their willingness to obey the customs of Colombian culture, they follow through with the murder of Santiago Nassar purely because they are obligated to do so. Since the twins represent society as a whole, the murder forces the reader to question not only the brothers' morality, but the morality of their entire society. The Vicario brothers are a clear everyman figure for Colombian society. I say society a lot. The fact that the brothers are identical twins is enough proof. The uniformity of two identical people indicates that everyone in the society has some degree of sameness. In the real-life situation Marquez based Chronicle of a Death Foretold on, the murder was carried out by two brothers who were twins, chose to write the brothers as identical twins who, quote, looked so much alike that it was difficult to tell them apart, close quote, which makes their characterization as a representation of everyone in Colombian society much more identifiable. In addition to their physical similarities, the twins are further characterized as an everyman figure by the language that Marquez uses to describe their actions. They operate as one person, performing every action together. On the morning of the murder, Marquez writes that, quote, they were still waiting for their dark wedding suits, and they looked devastated, but they'd done their duty and shaved. Although they hadn't stopped drinking, they weren't drunk. They looked rather like insomniac sleepwalkers. They'd fallen asleep, they had barely awakened. Then they both grabbed the rolled up newspapers. Close quote. The use of they with every verb in this paragraph indicates that the brothers complete actions in unison, further connoting both their mechanical nature and their identicality. This language is used throughout the novel, and Marquez only mentions Pablo Vicario as his own person a total of 33 times in the entire novel. Novel is repeated. And Pedro performs an independent action only 40 times in the novel. Again. In addition, the twins can be viewed as two sides of the same coin, a common trope in identical twin characters. Marquez writes, quote, in difficult emergencies, they showed opposite characters. Close quote. Characters is too repeated. Which highlights the characterization of the Vicario brothers as one person, since in moral dilemmas, many people feel as though they are divided between two options. Two, opposing options. The characterization of the twins as one person contributes to their depiction as an everyman figure, since it highlights their sameness, which portrays them as a representation of Colombian society. This sameness also brings out their mechanical nature, since identical actions typically imply robotic mechanisms or similar inhuman characteristics. The twins' mechanical nature is further displayed through their actions, and is reinforced by Marquez's narration style, which does not allow for the discussion of the brothers' thoughts or emotions. This makes it seem as though the brothers have no thoughts or emotions, which further develops the criticism of Colombian society's mechanical nature. This is shown when the brothers hear that Santiago had taken Angela's virginity, since they are oddly not enraged, and instead they immediately, quote, went to the bin in the pigsty where they kept their sacrificial tools and picked out the two best knives, close quote, knowing without thought that they would have to kill him. They would. Ordinarily, when a murder occurs, the murderer displays some sign of vicious will, or is so utterly consumed by anger that they see no alternative to murder. In the case of Pablo and Pedro Vicario, however, there is no vicious will. Marquez depicts the Vicario brothers' response to Angela's confession as an action rather than an emotion, which contributes to the characterization of the twins as emotionless. If Marquez had written that the Vicario brothers were overcome by anger that Santiago had taken, the murder would have been more understandable. However, since the murder is committed without any sign of anger, the twins appear almost robotic, and the reader questions the culture which makes the twins feel as though they must carry through with such a horrible act as murder. It's like awkward wording. This creates a critique of Colombian society and the morality of the behavior it promotes, since the characters who represent it commit a murder without any personal reason other than that their culture expects it of them. In addition to the Vicario brothers' initial reaction to the confession, the murder scene itself is void of emotion. As writes, quote, "Then they both kept on kniving him against the door with alternate and easy stabs, floating in the dazzling backwater that they had found on the other side of fear. They didn't hear the shouts of the whole town, frightened by its own crime." Close quote. The mechanical imagery of the brothers' alternating repeated stabs is particularly striking, since typical murder scenes are written as full of passion. The twins do not even show awareness of the severity of their crime, and seem almost like figures in a crude whirligig toy. The way in which Marquez writes the murder scene is also bizarre, since he focuses on the physical challenge of killing someone rather than the emotional challenge. He writes, quote, "They were exhausted, and yet they thought that Santiago Nassar would never fall. Shit, cousin, Pablo Vicario told me. You can't imagine how hard it is to kill a man." Close quote. By focusing on how physically demanding it is to kill someone, Marquez further characterizes the Vicario brothers as emotionless. That's a little skipping a step of logic. In addition, by depicting a typically emotionally charged action as completely void of emotion, Marquez makes the reader recognize the extreme wrongness of the murder. The way in which Marquez describes the act of murder as a physically demanding task that is difficult but must be accomplished showcases his criticism of Colombian society and the normalcy of honor killings. This is shown when he highlights the fact that the brothers are not angry at their victim at all, and they only think about the physical challenge of killing him, in the same way that a robot does not feel emotions but can still become physically drained from a task. Another example of Marquez's criticism of Colombian society can be found in the parallels between the murder of Santiago Nassar and a routine animal butchering. He uses language such as, quote, "pig-killing knives, slaughters iron wrist, and the moan of a calf," close quote, to depict the murder scene in this way. By treating a murder as only another butchering, Marquez exposes the normalcy of honor killings in Colombian society. This is further accomplished by the villainization of Santiago Nassar during his murder. Since most people hold the belief that the dead should be treated with respect, Marquez's depiction of Santiago as an animal during and after his death is extremely jarring. I do apostrophe S and then apostrophe. Marquez's image of Santiago Nassar's intestines spilling out at the end of the story, quote, "Desperate, Pablo Vicario gave him a horizontal slash on the stomach and all his intestines exploded out," close quote, mirrors the way that the rabbit's intestines spilled out at the beginning of the story. Quote, "She pulled out the insides of a rabbit by the roots and threw the steaming guts to the dogs," close quote, which not only contributes to the depiction of Santiago as an animal, but gives the novel a cyclic structure, implying that this pattern of honor killings is a cycle as opposed to an isolated incident. This further has his critique of Colombian society, since he implies that murders are commonplace and just a part of the culture. Throughout Chronicle of a Death Foretold, Gabriel Garcia Marquez uses descriptive language and imagery to characterize the Vicario brothers as an everyman figure for Colombian society. These quotes are on every minute sometimes, but not always. Creating a critique of this culture and honor killings as a whole. Although Marquez criticizes the Colombian culture of the 1950s when the novel takes place, his decision to revisit the story 30 years later can be interpreted as a criticism of Colombian culture of the 1980s as well. Marquez writes the horrific story of the murder of Santiago Nassar to reveal Colombian society have changed in the 30 years between the real-life event and the novelization. This speaks to the larger problem with Colombian culture's strong traditions and social customs, since the issues faced by Colombians in 1951 were still problems in 1981.